And joining us now, NBC News contributor Jonathan Alter. He is the author of his very best, Jimmy Carter, A Life, and NBC presidential historian Michael Beschloss. Guys, thank you both so much for joining us today. Jonathan, we're talking about a guy who started out on a peanut farm. He went in and landed on the second ever U.S. nuclear submarine. He was a governor, a president. He won a Nobel Peace Prize. He taught Sunday school. He built houses for the needy. I mean, his biography is just incredible. How do you sum up this life?
Well, it's an epic American life. And as you're indicating, he was a Renaissance man, the only Renaissance man we've had as president since Thomas Jefferson. And so they're actually about another dozen or so skills that he had and things that he did. He wrote a novel. He wrote a book of poetry. He wrote a children's book. He was a master woodworker. He, had one of the best arrowhead collections in the United States. There's so many dimensions to this man, and his skills as a diplomat, almost more than as president. Many of his major achievements as president related to this enormous skill he had diplomatically. The Camp David Accords are the most durable peace treaty since World War II. Imagine if Israel and Egypt were at war now. How much worse things would be in the Middle East. They had fought 4 wars before he made peace between them. So this is a big story, a great American story, and an inspiring story. Only 12 years in actual public office. But the rest
and that includes his time as a state senator, governor, and then the president.
Right. But look at the level of public service. And so that can inspire, and I think will inspire, other people to see what they can do to make a contribution.
Yeah, and never mind the disease efforts to eradicate diseases that we also have discussed. I mean, his life and legacy is just touching so many people and places, Michael. He's a man who seems to have lived many, many lives, I think. The presidency was really just a small part of his body of work. Which part of Carter's presidential legacy looms largest to you?
Well, the Camp David Accord in the Middle East, which has stood for all these decades, is the one that stands out. And also a lot of his ideas. As John knows, he knew President Carter better than I did. I knew him a little bit. But there was nothing that galled Jimmy Carter more than to be told that he was the best ex-president in history. It's like, the guy who said, you've got the best restaurant I've ever eaten in that's in a hospital. It's sort of an implied insult. People didn't mean it that way. But Carter would say, if you like the things that I did in my ex-presidency, take a look at my presidency. But the other thing I think Jonathan is making a great point is that this was an unbelievable life force. He comes out of this, as John has said, 19th century atmosphere of rural Georgia, gets to the Naval Academy, has a successful peanut business. He was a millionaire by the time he went into the White House in those days from this business. So he's a successful businessman. And at the same time is able to rise in politics, get elected president of the United States, 1976, then the second time defeated by Ronald Reagan. But what does he do? He says, rather than just be flat on my back, I'm going to see what an ex-president can do. So I'm going to, for the first time, be an ex-president who tries to do things like eliminate disease and spread democracy and judge elections and build houses at home. Unbelievable life force that even if you set aside him as president, this is a human being and a degree of character we almost never find. It is almost epic.
I mean, you both have talked about how his perhaps most defining moments as president involve foreign policy, both his successes and his failures, including the Camp David Accord between Israel and Egypt. But he boycotted the 1980 Moscow Olympics. That was controversial. Of course, there was the Iran hostage crisis, which many saw as a big failure or problem of his administration. Let me ask you, Jonathan, what do you think the Carter administration meant for America's place in the world?
Well, at the time, he was seen as diminishing our stature. And as he told me, if he had bombed Iran, he probably would have been reelected. But the hostages would have died. And he prioritized, maybe to a fault, the lives of the hostages, and they all came home safely. They weren't released until moments after Reagan took the oath, but Carter got them released. He did do things that were very unpopular, in some cases unwise. In retrospect, boycotting the Olympics to protest the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was ineffective. So there definitely are shortcomings, but even on the domestic side, there are big wins that people have minimized. He signed 15 major pieces of environmental legislation. He doubled the size of the national park system.
In some ways, he was ahead of his time when you look at the environmental and climate piece.
He wanted, if he had been reelected, he wanted electric vehicles by the mid-1980s. He was 30 years ahead of his time on that. People remember that he put those solar panels on the roof of the White House that Reagan took down. That was symbolic. There was actual legislation funding for the first time clean energy. There was important, good deregulation of things like the trucking industry that allowed us to have this just-in-time delivery system that makes Amazon and FedEx possible. That's all because of changes that were made in the Carter administration. So even though he failed in certain areas, which we all, need to talk about, and his very best is very much warts and all, there are these big underappreciated successes both at home and abroad.
I'm glad you bring up some of those because, like you said, a lot of us are just learning about his life's work in this moment as we honor and celebrate that legacy and his impact. Domestically, I think, Carter took office. As Americans, we know we're still reeling from Nixon's Watergate scandal, and he's known for the economic piece of all of this. The country faced a recession, and it led to this pivotal moment of the Carter presidency. Let's watch.
I want to talk to you right now about a fundamental threat to American democracy. I do not mean our political and civil liberties. They will endure. And I do not refer to the outward strength of America, a nation that is at peace tonight everywhere in the world, with unmatched economic power and military might. The threat is nearly invisible in ordinary ways. It is a crisis of confidence.
Truly famous last words, or infamous last words. Michael, why was that 1979 speech considered such a political blunder for so many years?
It was considered a blunder because people said, if you're a leader, you don't criticize the people and say that a lot of the problems are their fault, even if sometimes in history they have turned out to be. We're not in that case that summer, however. And he also fired half of his cabinet, which made him extremely unpopular. But what Carter was addressing, I think, was just, the center of Jimmy Carter. This was a leader who, FDR said that the presidency is primarily a place of moral leadership. Jimmy Carter believed that in his heart. That's how he got elected in 1976 after the disheartening exposure of Americans to the Watergate scandal and the Vietnam War and the lies that had been told. That was the essence of who he was. By 1980, people were so concentrated on the economy, justifiably, and what they felt was America's role in the world, which seemed to be hamstrung by a hostage crisis in Iran and Soviet surges in Afghanistan, that Carter paid the price, was defeated by Reagan. He got only 49 electoral votes that second time.
Well, it's a lot to discuss. We could go on and on. Again, just such an impressive life's work. Jonathan Alter and Michael Beschloss, thank you both for joining us this morning.